Good evening and welcome to Vishwa Talks. My name is Srivani. Thank you all to each one of you for attending today's event. For those of you who have attended a Vishwa Talk before, a very warm welcome to you. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, here's a little bit about us. Vishwa Talks is an initiative by Vishwa. Vishwa is an online platform for everyday change makers and social champions. It's a crowdfunding and a crowdsourcing platform that is aimed at helping anyone find the support they need in their efforts to solve problems for themselves and for others, and in the process, who would like to make our world into a better place. Vishwa Talks is a series of weekly webinars hosted every Saturday that are focused on gaining an in-depth knowledge from the experts on a wide range of topics that are pertinent to our current context. Manisha ji believes in scholarship that is socially engaged, accessible, and global in scope. She considers her work in academia as a way to make a meaningful contribution towards a better world through teaching and writing. Manisha ji has a PhD in mass communication from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, USA, and a PhD in education from the Maharaja Sayoji Rao University of Baroda, India. She has taught and worked as a media consultant, communication trainer.
Particularly, we're talking about something that's very close to my heart, because as somebody who deals with media studies and also education, I think what we have today is a really urgent topic that combines our interests in education and media. So if we think about our own lives, right, whether it is the closed channels of our WhatsApp groups, the algorithmically skewed Facebook and Twitter feeds that we keep looking at, or the recommendations on YouTube, we're all increasingly living within rabbit holes that prevent us from encountering opinions that are different from our own. The kind of media consumption that we engage in cements our biases and doesn't really prepare us to engage in dialogue across divides. Manisha and Kiran, in their book, Raising a Humanist, Conscious Parenting in an Increasingly Fragmented World, discuss some ways in which we can escape what I think of as our bias boxes.
It was really nice to know about the wonderful work that you are doing together. So thank you for this opportunity. I will start with a very small paragraph from the book that Usha just mentioned, and it is Raising a Humanist. So, okay, let me start with this. Who does not like a safe shelter that is comfortable and well insulated to keep the cold, heat, rain, and wind at bay? Heavy curtains shield the doors and the windows. Our children will inherit these safe havens from us and live their lives in the same comforts that we are used to while growing up. Sounds wonderful, doesn't it? So I would say that we all also have mental homes like this. And you know what? There is nothing really wonderful about such mental homes. And these are our echo chambers. So communication scholars use various terms to describe these mental homes. They call them communication silos, thought ghettos, also in a very theoretical term, communication dissonance, and echo chambers. But what all these terms basically mean is that we don't like to get out of our comfort zones, and we like to be in the zones, which are mentally comfortable, emotionally comfortable, intellectually comfortable, right? And we generally shun anybody trying to, shake us from this really comfortable zones. So that's why we like to hear, watch, and read only those things which correspond what we already believe, right? And we also like to stick to our beliefs, our opinions, our ideologies, And so anything, if somebody says, okay, read this, and it doesn't actually connect with what we already believe, just try to ignore it, and stick to this mental, because getting out of any comfort zone, physical or mental, is not easy, right? So it requires some effort. So how do you know if you are in an echo chamber? As Usha just mentioned, the easiest way, the very first step is to look around and look at your networks, like look at your friends, as well as on social media. Right? Look at, for example, your WhatsApp groups and what kind of messages, jokes you receive every day. Look at your friend circle and see, like, do they all believe in the same ideologies? Or you have people, who come from very different backgrounds. They have very different views on topics. There is a scope for debate and arguments, right? And you have a kind of friends, family, social media networks that lets you look at, every issue from very different perspectives. And everything can be looked at from many different angles. So this is like one way of knowing that you are in an echo chamber. Now, the thing is that the book that Usha and Kiran just we mentioned in Kiran's introduction, and Usha just mentioned, the whole central idea that we work around in this book and lot of our work is how to step out of these echo chambers, these comfort zones, and this is kind of our response to what we find disturbing around us, what is happening today, that everybody's stuck in one way of thinking. And, it's somehow, as scholars, as citizens, it disturbs us. And this was our response to just wondering that what can we do to have more dialogue, more discussion in our society and our networks. So, we ourselves are very much aware that opening our hearts and minds to, people who are totally different than us, who have very different lifestyles and very different way of thinking, is not at all an easy task, and even if you're open to the idea of stepping out of your echo chamber, it's kind of a roller. So it's sometimes very exciting, joyful, but you're also scared, at times you really feel like screaming out of fear, but you also like the thrill, to experience new ideas, new people. And it is also sometimes more scary when it concerns our students, because we feel responsible for them. And we sometimes wonder that, are we doing good by pushing them out of their comfort zones? Are we putting them, at risk in vulnerable positions? So we completely understand that this is not an easy task at all. And that's why we always say that the book, the talk, everything is a conversation. It's not something that we impose on people that, look, you have to do this way, or if you can't do that, there's something wrong with you. So let's say, for example, we come across so many men. If they are asked to, say, cook or say change diapers, that's the most, I think, the ultimate. They would feel very uncomfortable because they have been socialized, in their families, in the social structure and culture they have been brought up, that this is a woman's job and a man should be looked down upon, if he does something like this, kind of a low level task, right? Not only that, man, even sometimes the women in his family would be equal, because they are also, product of the same culture and the same thinking. So remember, like in the lockdown, all the jhadu pocha jokes. So just because some men had to do some housework, it was like, oh, my WhatsApp was flooded, with like, we are stuck at home and look what is happening. And now if somebody asks my child, what does your dad do? He'll say, oh, he does jhadu pocha, So these are all jokes, but it tells us a lot about how like we have very strict gender ideas in our head. Similarly, if somebody is raised in families or in culture, very, very strict religion and caste boundaries. And we tell you have to invite people from other religions, other castes, especially what like we call like so-called, lower caste. They're suddenly very uncomfortable because they've never done it and they are not expected to do it. It's not an easy idea, to accept for them and start working towards it. So we might wonder that if echo chambers are so comforting and we've always been raised to think in a certain way, why not continue, right? What is wrong? It has served us well so far. So why there is any need to change and even step out of this? So I have two arguments, and Kiran and I have often discussed this, that why are we all the time saying that step out of your echo chamber, right? Why, take the trouble? So two compelling reasons I can say. One is that, by being in echo chambers, it might feel comfortable, but you might lose out on several enriching and exciting opportunities to gain new knowledge, to understand the world better, to make really enriching and meaningful friendships. And there's so, like so many shades and colors in, literature, poetry, so much you will lose out on. The other compelling reason is that if you are in your echo chamber, it's very likely that you will also consciously or unconsciously discriminate against people who are not like you, and especially people who do not have as much power. So people, for example, who are help at your home, people who work for you, people who you think are not from your like middle or upper class, right? It is a tendency to look at these people as others, who are not like us, who are different, and not just different, but inferior in some way, because we are taught that the way we are is the way to be in the world, and we will discriminate against these people. And it can really ruin lives. Such discrimination, whether practiced consciously or unconsciously, can scar, people for life. If you read, stories and anecdotes by people who have been discriminated against, either because of their caste or because of their class, you see that the scars remain. Even I was reading President Obama's talk, and like he said that, like these experiences can remain there for life. So stepping out of your echo chambers not only help yourself, like having a more enriched life, but it can also help others live a better life. So now it's very important, to understand two terms here, and I'll explain to them very simply. One is that when I say discrimination, what did I mean? And the second, when we come to the strategies that Kiran and I talk about in the book, the second term is privilege. Right? So, I mean, discrimination is rampant all around. But what is actually, we have to look at what we call systemic discrimination. So what happens when we look at people and look at them as inferior, it's not that we always have had experiences with them. We think that, somebody is like not good good because we have met a person like that, or we have actually had a bad experience with a person like that. It mostly comes from read what the media tell us, what other people in our networks tell us. So, and when these things are, normalized, it happens again and again and again, it becomes so normalized that everybody around us thinks that even people who are discriminated against also start thinking that that is normal, right? That is acceptable. And then it becomes systemic discrimination. So one thing we have to do about our echo chambers is to look inwards, do introspection, observe practices, and see, are we practicing knowingly or unknowingly discrimination we think are not like us? So I will discuss three tactics here, that three approaches, you can say, three tools that we talk about, and then Kiran will talk about some others. So I think the very first step that we recommend when you want to step out your echo chambers, and this is more for people who have higher power in the society, right? People who have power either because they belong to a certain caste or religion, people who have power because they are highly educated, hold better jobs, or, in a social strata which are considered higher up. Because there are all kinds of ways that you can have power. Sometimes you have power just because you are a man, right? Or you have inherited so much wealth that you can be privileged in so many ways. So one thing is that we have to understand what is a privilege. So I'm just going to read just a little. Okay. So a simple definition of the term privilege explains it as a special right, advantage, or immunity granted or available only to a particular person or group. So you must have heard terms like white privilege, male privilege, privilege of the rich, etc. Now, I'm not saying that all privilege is assigned to you at birth. There are so many, examples of privilege that you acquire by, either because of your work or your position or your education or to contribute to the society. But unfortunately, much of the privilege is just because you have acquired a certain label at birth. And you haven't done really anything, for gaining that privilege. You haven't. It's just given to you because you are either gender or certain caste or certain religion or certain class. So it is very interesting. Privilege is only invisible to those who have it, because you are so used to it, right? You've always lived with it. So most people who have certain privileges don't find anything wrong in it, because they again think that that is normal. That's how things are. So the first thing we can do if we want to check, get out of our echo chambers, is to examine that, okay, what kind of privilege do we have? What kind of power we have just because we are from a certain caste, gender, or class or religion? And we started writing our book. Kiran and I had to do it several times to understand ourselves, right? That what kind of baggage are we going to carry when we look at these things? So that's the first thing I would say we need to do. And it's always privileged or underprivileged. Sometimes you can be privileged in one situation, you have a lot of power in one situation, the same person might be underprivileged in some other situation. So it's very interesting that, okay, when are you discriminating and when are you discriminated against? That is also equally important for us to see. And again, as I said, that it's not going to be easy, because a lot of times, when you do that, when you question discrimination, when you decide to go against, what is the cultural norms, you will face problems. Let me just put it very simply, So for example, are willing to step out of your echo chambers. So suppose there are parents, whose child has decided to enter a same-sex relationship. Even if the parents are accepting, we understand that they would be worried and scared because they don't know how people in their social networks will actually react. Like, would they be looked down upon? Would they, lose status in the society? Will they put their own at risk? Right? So this is again not an easy task, and it's a lifelong process, but worth entering into because of the reasons we discussed. Our second strategy is to ask questions, just simply ask questions. So we have some questions here. We started with just but they resonate with you. So when we looked around what's happening in our society, we started asking these questions, and we have questions in our book also. Why do we believe that those who aren't doing well in life are lazy? Why do we believe that the wife's parents should not expect anything from the couple, but the husband's parents have all the rights over their time, money, and also have the right to dictate their life choices? Why do we limit the focus of our conversations about women in positions of leadership, whether it's politics or literature or corporate life, but we limit to their clothes, appearance, religion? Why do we automatically assume that our daughter will be happier if she marries an engineer rather than a school teacher? Why do we think that equality means bringing women up to the male standard? Why are jobs and professions that have traditionally associated with the work that women do often ill-paid and less respected? Why do we believe that everyone benefiting from affirmative action or reservation do not have the merit, but everyone studying in self-financed courses or on donation seats are okay? Why do we think that keeping Rosa should be respected, but ridicule those observing Karwa Chauth, or vice versa? Something important and not, in other religions. So these are some of the questions that we keep asking ourselves because we realize that we just get them from things. And the more homogeneous, the more, your networks are just like you, the more you will question less because you'll not have a chance to question. So we have realized that two simple questions like why or why not are very powerful ways to step out of our echo chambers. So every time you see discrimination around you, every time you see a practice that is unnecessarily putting somebody of a particular gender, caste, or class, or religion in a lower position, just ask why. And keep asking why. And next, whenever you come across something that suggests change, suggests something positive, a better vision, and a different way to live life, at least begin with asking, why not? Okay. So looking at systemic discrimination, looking at our own and underprivileged, asking why and why not are some of the strategies that we suggest, and Kiran will talk about more. The only thing, like before I end, I'm just going to say this, that we recommend that you do this with tech. Tech quality, we don't talk enough in our society. But doing something tactfully, can have very different results than doing something, insensitively that I'm the one, who is better than all these people and they need to change, So in no way when we say that, step out of your echo chambers, question people, we question traditions, question stories that mythology tells us, because there is a lot of good there, but there is also a lot that was written for a very different time, in a very different context. There's no need to assume that everything that we learn from our ancient text, is true in every context, and like would always serve us in a good way. So they might not. So, but what we suggest is that you don't have to ruin every family dinner, every family get together. Like you don't have to really hurt older people in your family. You can use tact. There are ways to pose these questions. There are ways to very, gently, sensitively introduce new ideas in your network, in your family. Sometimes just asking a gentle, why do you think so? And, introducing a new idea often helps. And we have also observed that a lot of people are in their echo chambers because they have not been exposed to other ideas. So gently exposing, your family, the elderly people in your networks, even your colleagues or, or young people in your family to newer ideas can be done. So we really recommend, that we should have that kind, like do this with love and respect and not to prove that you are right. And it can really help. So we also put a lot of emphasis on self-care, right? Because we sometimes get so sensitive about all these things. It starts affecting us physically, psychologically. So you have to do this with love and respect and self-care and a lot of emotional intelligence, relational intelligence. I think I would stop there, Kiran, and I would request you to take over and then talk about, some of the other strategies that we have worked out to step out of the echo chambers. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Professor Pathak-Shelat. And thank you to the organizing committee for having us here. I would like to begin by providing an insight into our lives as academicians, researchers, and most importantly, as media educators. Both of us have worked with children and parents in different places and different regions. We have worked in rural villages, towns, and small and big cities. What we present in our work, what we present is the knowledge, expertise, and advice so many children, parents, and teachers have shared with us generously. Based on our work in rural villages of Gujarat, we wrote an academic book in 2019 describing important media education principles, practices, and strategies for promoting interfaith dialogue and collaboration between Hindu and Muslim children. This book had some wonderful resources, and it compelled us to think of ways in which we could make this knowledge accessible to more people and to a broader audience, especially people outside academia. We thoroughly believe in democratizing education and knowledge, and we therefore decided to write the latest book that we wrote, Raising a Humanist, especially for parents and educators who want to have these timely conversations on how to help their kids be more confident, compassionate, and civic. Our books are always based on a very deep understanding of the communities we work with. We work with them for years together before we start collecting any form of data or analyzing it. We often choose to immerse ourselves in the lives of children and parents and teachers we engage with. We observe their lifestyles, beliefs, attitudes, and other conditions, their living conditions. We talk to them, we conduct interviews, request their feedback, request their guidance to help us understand their lives. In a sense, we conduct what is called ethnographies. We encourage them to think with us and to help us develop and identify the best teaching learning practices that will allow us to raise our children to be humanists. One true aim for us is to humanize people towards one another, make them believe that a better, more peaceful and interconnected world is possible, and to basically nudge them to make such a world a reality. So when we wrote this book, our idea was to create and initiate an effort to start a discussion on how we can transcend our echo chambers. Hearts and minds, as Professor Pathak-Shelat discussed, to differences can be a very overwhelming experience, but it is an important work. It is a project we must all undertake to make sure our children, our students are kind to themselves, to their bodies, their own minds, to teach them to respect others. And this work is also important because it gifts them with skills required to critically evaluate and question their beliefs and ideologies. Think about this for a minute. How many people here, at least once in their lives, used fairness creams and encouraged their children, especially their daughters, to do? Have we not grown up watching TV commercials on fairness cream and aspired somewhere deep within to have a body that is portrayed as ideal and perfect in our societies? Even in the media we consume, from movies, songs, and nowadays Instagram, the most common thing children see are photoshopped and filtered images and videos. They develop unrealistic expectations from themselves and their bodies. How many of us have a family member or a neighbor, a friend who enjoys providing unwanted advice to young people, especially girls, on how to reduce weight, have a fair or a clear skin, and so on? And how often do we feel confident confronting our family members, our neighbors? I don't think we feel very confident doing that. I don't. I know for sure. So in this book, we begin with an acknowledgement that introducing such changes is never an easy task. We say that it's a two-step process. We must first begin with identifying our own limitations and recognizing our biases and prejudices. And then we must spend time and effort to introduce changes in our own families and communities. In the book, we suggest 3 comprehensive strategies that will help parents and teachers identify techniques, lesson plans, and tools for transcending echo chambers. The first strategy involves ideas on how to redesign our social environments, our surroundings, our schools, families, neighborhoods, and communities, people in our networks, those our children talk to and learn from. Children observe and learn from everything that happens around them. This is called the process of socialization. Children are socialized to behave in a certain way. We teach our daughters to behave in feminine ways and our boys to man up. We teach our young children about their religion, caste, and so much more. This learning does not always happen in a direct way. Children observe what happens in their homes and learn from these observations. Think about this. Women who are assertive are called bossy or dominating, while men who are assertive are called leaders. Women who are sensitive are called compassionate or kind, while sensitive men are called weak and pathetic. When children watch, hear, and observe such conversations and practices in the media they consume, in the TV shows their family members watch, in their neighborhoods, they develop ideas on how they should behave as men and women. And these ideas can be very limiting, constraining, and discriminatory. Children use these observations to make sense of the world. What they watch, what they practice, and hear determines their understanding of the world and how they should behave in it. If we want to raise our children as humanists, we must first be willing to change the way they are socialized. The language we use, the examples we provide, and the way we treat other people in front of them. For instance, what happens when children observe that their family members serve their house helps in separate utensils? They learn how to discriminate against people from a different class and caste within their own homes. And when they ask us questions about why we discriminate, we give them excuses such as these people are dirty, they're unhygienic, they may have diseases, and so on. We seldom try to identify biases in our own behavior, and we snub our children if they ask us difficult questions. In the book, we emphasize that the why questions, they matter. not only because we must be honest and open with our children if we expect the same kind of behavior from them, but also because children can compel us to re-examine the problems in our own thinking, the gaps in our own thinking, our own biases and prejudices. The second strategy involves thinking outside the box and making the best use of available resources. As parents and teachers, we have so many tools, techniques, information, and gadgets at our disposal. Children have access to unlimited information and entertainment resources these days, at least children from middle and higher income backgrounds. And such an exposure can be used to educate our children to be the citizens of the world. There is so much good on the internet, communities, spaces, creative outlets, mentoring opportunities. Exposing ourselves and our children to these possibilities is crucial. For instance, many children are familiar with some aspects of the Japanese culture because they regularly consume anime. And then we have the K-pop family. How can we help our children understand their own culture, but also be ready to help them expand their minds and open their hearts to new experiences? Educators and parents can teach their children to harness the potential of technology and to develop a multicultural perspective, to find global opportunities that will help them enhance their knowledge base, their skill sets, and networks. Our kids inhabit online childhoods to some extent. You must get on board or you will be left behind. It is as simple as that. And based on our experiences, we provide ideas and suggestions to parents and teachers on how they can become tech savvy. What media literacy and critical thinking skills are important to help our children navigate a technological world? Which online networks and platforms, resources, and applications will help our children stay safe as they connect with other people from across the globe? For instance, many international organizations such as UNESCO, UNICEF, World Bank, Youth Kiawas, they offer writing internships or blogging opportunities. Children can share their ideas on civic global issues such as climate change, pollution, poverty on these platforms, and they often receive feedback. We have tried to design some very interesting and easy critical literacy exercises that we hope will help our children build and participate in global and civic communities while steering clear of problems such as cyberbullying, cyber extremism, identity fraud, and grooming. This book will give readers a perspective, will give the readers ideas about how to initiate internet discipline, maintain transparency, and equip children with digital literacy competencies. A world connected with the internet requires globetrotting citizens, those who can adopt and adapt, love and resist, strive and hold, hope and also act. So let your children know the endless possibilities, the endless potential the world holds out for them, but also prepare them to embrace it with caution. Children are our futures, and our futures are thoroughly global, we believe. The third strategy involves play-based teaching and learning. We provide some practical, fun activities for children, parents, and educators to participate in together. For instance, we discuss the importance of socially engaged arts. The focus of socially engaged arts practices is threefold. First, to identify some of the very common but largely ignored problems of our local communities and regions. Second, to equip children with opportunities and resources required to use their imagination and identify unique solutions for those problems. And third, to create a learning environment based on principles of change-oriented behavior, innovation, and participation. Socially engaged arts practices such as art for activism, like drawing graffitis, organizing street plays, flash mobs, and craft shops, writing and performing stories such as slam poetry. All of these activities can be used to design learning opportunities for children. In the book, we provide interesting lesson plans which can be tried at homes, in schools, and in our neighborhoods. We also suggest ways in which parents can turn their homes into digital arts lab, take children and their groups of young artists onto the streets for performances, use photo walks and other techniques to design multimedia arts projects for activism and civic engagement, and work in diverse teams with children from different backgrounds, essentially. All of this is possible, we argue, if we start from a place of tolerance. Tolerance is not merely a personal characteristic. We argue and explain that tolerance must be cultivated as a civic virtue and it should be included in our everyday lives. All of us live in plural societies, and with globalization, as people move to new places, they bring their culture and knowledge, their values and beliefs. And to thrive in such pluralistic societies, it is very crucial for us to accept that differences can be in conversation with each other without being at war. We enlist practices of tolerance promoted in different cultures, regions, and religions to emphasize that coexistence and mutual respect is very important to ensure that our societies do not fall into a state of peril. From Buddhist philosophies of bodhicitta and meditative practices of Tonglen to communications theories such as Sahridaya and Sadharanikaran, there are so many insights available, so many ways in which people can practice tolerance in their civic, personal, and political lives. We begin with a belief that, contrary to the common perception that humans are weak, they are selfish, and divided, human nature is defined largely by virtues such as generosity and altruism that we practice daily. A difficult challenge emerges when this generosity and acceptance is limited to people in our in group, those who are from the same religion, same class, same caste, and so on. We therefore urge parents and educators to use philosophical debates as an inspiration on how to extend their faith and compassion beyond their in groups and engage those in the out groups with the same level of generosity. We thoroughly understand that raising children who are open and critical, strong and compassionate, and who believe in freedom and respect others is never going to be an easy task. It can prove to be a rewarding and exciting process if we make forgiveness integral to our journey as parents and educators. We need to forgive ourselves and we need to forgive others. We need to get up again when we stumble, and we must help others to stand with us. As we conclude, we leave you with an excerpt from the book, One of the Tables. And here is how it goes. So a monk was standing on a seashore. He would pick up the fish that got thrown out on the shore with the high tide and put it back gently in the water. A passerby saw this and watched for a while, perplexed. When he could not control his curiosity, he asked the monk, "What are you doing?" "I'm saving these fish from dying by putting them back in the water," the monk replied. The man scoffed at the response and said, "There are thousands of them that die on the shore every day. Would a handful you save make a difference?" To this, the monk smiled calmly, picked up one fish from the shore, gently placed it in the water, and said, "Well, it made a difference to this fish." So here's hoping we all strive to bring some change in people's lives we associate with and contribute to upholding our moral obligations to principles of equality and justice. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kiran and Manisha. And we already have some questions in the chat box, but I think Srivani would like to make a few remarks and then we'll get to the discussion.
Kiranji, your story almost brought tears to my eyes about the fish. I would also like to thank, while before that, I would now like to request each of you to take 30 seconds to answer a poll for us. The purpose of the poll is to serve you better so that we can curate better topics that we will soon bring to you. While doing that, I would like to acknowledge Ms. Usha Raman. She's a professor, Department of Communication, University of Hyderabad, and editor of Teacher Plus. That's how I got to know her. It's teachers, it's children who are the future of our country. And unless teachers are trained, teachers are inspired, teachers are motivated, and teachers serve, we cannot make a difference. And her life, she has given her life to serve the teachers community, in turn serving these children. her work, I don't think we can say enough thanks to her to what she's contributing. She's the editor of Teacher Plus, a monthly magazine aimed at school teachers and a wider education community. She's a professor of media studies at the University of Hyderabad, where she teaches and researches in the area of digital culture, health communication, journalism pedagogy. She's a columnist for the Hindu's Sunday magazine and has published widely on topics related to education, health, and women issues. I would also like to talk a little bit about Vishwa Talks. As in continuation to the work Kiran ji and Manisha ji have been doing, we are also trying to bring in a little social change to help at least some fish to make a difference. So Vishwa Talks is a space to expand the horizons of our minds, to come out of those echo chambers. While one of the speakers was talking to me about how we give different crockery to us, help, I remembered myself just a few days ago, I was saying, these are yours, these are ours. I didn't even know it was wrong until I'm hearing them on these talks. Every week when me and my husband listen to these talks, our exposures change, our thought processes change. And I want people to see, because every webinar we call experts from different domains to discuss, to examine opinions, to examine issues, to examine problems, to examine different perspectives. This week's topic is very pertinent to our current circumstances in the world, where everything is so fluid, the media is so open, everybody has an opinion and everybody is pulling things to different directions. Here is a webinar which is actually making us sit back and ask, and showing us a pathway on how to deal with things. Ask why? Why not? When there is someone who's hurt, ask why. And when you can see, hey, there's a better way of dealing with it, why not? So every webinar is an interactive session where each of us can walk away with more respect for each other and a deeper understanding of the topic at hand. Thank you so much, Manisha ji, and thank you. You know, Manisha ji, when you spoke, there was so much I could relate to, and I'm sure every single woman or every man who's discriminated can actually listen to what you're saying and they can understand. There was so much of empathy in what you spoke, so much. I experienced the pain and the patience that you have shown across probably your lifetime, and what you're trying to share with people on how to deal with it. Your experiences, your education, your research, amazing. And Kiranji, you seem to be coming from a very new generation with new thoughts and new visions, and it's such a beautiful collaboration, both of you. And thanks, Ms. Usha, for getting such a combination of people to talk. You know, it's like people coming from different dimensions, people coming from different generations, people coming from different places of the world coming to India and coming to talk among us. We are privileged to be in India, and we're privileged that we can actually so openly talk. Thank you so much. Yeah, so we will take our question and answer session. So I'll just close this session. I would like to thank Biological Events for funding Roshni Trust with their wheels, where they were taking vans to underprivileged places around Secunderabad and Hyderabad and giving medication, taking doctors and serving the underprivileged. I would also now like to introduce two new fundraisers. One is from Parampara Foundation. In this COVID period, a lot of artists have lost their livelihood. They are the people who are keeping the culture of our country. I would like each of you to share what you hear now with your friends and family who can make a difference in the lives of these artists. See, they are the custodians of our culture. There are many arts in India that are getting extinct, but there are few people who are still fighting for them, who are still to make, to protect that art. And Parampara is coming out with a little dance league, a kind of a competition for Kuchipudi and Bharatanatyam as an introduction with these, because these are not people who need to be just given something. These are people who need to be respected, valued. So this is just a competition so that, there is little energy given back into this community of artists. So we request you, if you know anyone who can fund their this fundraiser, where the gifts of the prize money can be given by any CSR funding or high net worth individuals, please share it with them. And there is another NGO in Kukatpalli called Balavikas, which is working with the underprivileged children with disabilities. So Vishwa Foundation is helping pay the salaries of 3 speech therapists. So if there's, and the speech therapist, we're paying 15,000 every month. If there's anybody who can pay for even if it is 5,000, 2,000, 1,000 recurringly for a year, help paying the salaries of 3 speech therapists can help probably 100 students. So we request that use Vishwa as a platform to reach out to those NGOs and those people who are giving their lives and a lifetime to people, to serving people. Thank you so much. Yes, you can continue with your question and answer session now. Yes. Ushaji.
Yeah, thank you, Shrivani, and thanks for doing what you do at Vishwa. So I realize we already have questions in the chat, so maybe we can start with those before we move on to the live Q&A. I know that I've seen at least one hand raised. So there are a few different questions, and maybe I'll try and combine some of them. So Shela asks, how important are kindness and altruism in this journey of getting out of your echo chamber? And there's another question which asks, which is, does personality have anything to do with discrimination and also getting out of your echo chamber? So maybe you can combine your answer to those questions. Whichever one of you.
First one, Usha, what was the first one? The second was?
So the first one was kindness and altruism as qualities that are required in order to step out of the echo chamber. And the other one had to do with, is personality a factor here?
Kiran, do you want to take it?
Sure. So when we think about kindness, and when I think about kindness and compassion, I also think about it in the sense of sustaining conversations with people who think very differently, especially when we think about the generational gap. My generation, for instance, has more access to a lot of resources. We try to be a part of this woke culture. We keep ourselves, familiarize ourselves with these new terms, new discussions, what's the right terminology for every experience we have and stuff like that. But I'll give you an example. My parents come from a very different generation. They have different values, they have different experiences. So there will be instances where you will enter into a state of conflict with people who think differently. But this is what has worked for us in my family. When we think about differences in ideas and opinions, we sit together on the table and no conversation is a taboo conversation. We talk till the very end. And what's really interesting is that now my father identifies himself as a faltering feminist, because he says that even if I try really hard, there'll be so many things that I still have to learn. And that's so encouraging. I also identify as a faltering feminist because even I have some prejudices and biases which are so deeply embedded given where I come from, my culture, what I've seen. So the idea of kindness and compassion seeps into the conversations you have with people when you're trying to create a platform that allows all of us to thrive and to grow. So that is how we think about, kindness and compassion as virtues that allow us to exceed, to transcend our echo chambers, because it also allows us to be compassionate towards people who come from a different background and wouldn't be very comfortable just grasping onto new ideas. So I think that's why it's very important that we try to, cultivate these experiences which are based in kindness and compassion. And I don't believe, I mean, that's personal belief again, that personality is something which is inherent and cannot be changed. I've worked on areas and theories of socialization, so I thoroughly believe that we can change who we are, how we think, how we engage with the world, the way we make sense of the world, if we change the experiences, if we change people we surround ourselves with. If we are more open to differences, we are more curious about what are different perspectives and what are different opinions in different backgrounds, cultures, and communities. So personality is not something that's given or inherent. It's something that's cultivated over time. And if we make efforts, we can cultivate a personality that's deep rooted in ideas of compassion and togetherness.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, clearly personality is not a fixed entity, is what you're saying. So there are two questions from Aruna, who is asking, to what extent education can help in coming out of echo chambers? And she's also asking about, fake news, engineering information. How does that then limit one's ability to come out of echo chambers? And I think to some extent, both of you addressed that in your talks, but if you want to very briefly just repeat that. So one has to do with education and the other has to do with the algorithmic sort of management of social media.
Yeah. So, that's a great question, because we assume that education should help us get out of echo chambers. But I would ask, what kind of education? That is really important, because a lot of our education today is towards developing skills for careers, labor market. So we only value those skills and competences which are going to get our children, our students, high-paying jobs, succeed in the global market. And there is not enough of critical thinking, questioning, in the education we have right now. So I don't think that kind of education would really help. In fact, that kind of education would reinforce our echo chambers. So for education to help, I think there is a need to insert all these elements, and encourage children to question. Then education might help. Yeah. About fake news and engineering, they're all around us, and that's why it's so important to step out of one kind of messaging. So I've always, to our students, I give this simple example that if in your house, if you look out of only one window, you're going to see only one view, and then you think that that's what the world looks like. But if you open different windows and look outside from all different windows and doors, you see very different facets of the world. So even to protect ourselves from fake news and, engineered news, it's very important to diversify the sources of your information, I would say. That's the first thing you can do. And of course, then I've seen that even there are fact-checking organizations also have ideological leaning, So it's tricky. So constantly questioning and, it's more like not like buying everything wholeheartedly, but putting pieces of puzzle together to make your own perception could be one way of doing it. But it's tough, I admit.
Yeah, I guess to have healthy skepticism, but also to cultivate trust. I mean, it's a balance, right, between cultivating trust in people, but being skeptical of information.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I see there's one hand up. Anjali, would you like to ask your question?
Thanks, Dr. Raman. My question is essentially to Kiran. The thing is, you mentioned, Kiran, these different, the importance of tolerance, the importance of speaking to other people, listening to their points of view. But I mean, come to think of it, these are some privileges afforded to kids and people coming from caste and class privilege, right? To expect some of this in a very cutthroat world of kids coming from not so advantaged backgrounds. It's not like a clear-cut boundary between who is disadvantaged and who's. People come with different permutations and combinations of marginalizations. So what do you say to that? That if you aim for making your kid too sensitive, too kind, then they may not be able to survive in a cruel world. Yeah, that's my question.
Thank you so much for this question. So the first thing I'd like to say is, obviously people and children from more privileged backgrounds in terms of class and caste identities have more opportunities of transcending their echo chambers, and that too in a safer environment to a large extent. Because there is this space for conversation. And it's less frequent with children who do not come from the same privileged background. But we have also worked with children in rural areas, children who belong to low income contexts and communities. What's really interesting is, and that's why we also focus on the idea of making these things sustainable, making these practices sustainable, is that when I immersed myself in the rural villages of Gujarat, my first strategy was to train the teachers in those schools so that they could carry on the project, because the teachers come from the same communities. So they have the same set of thinking, they have the same biases and prejudices. So the first difficult task is to push them to transcend their echo chambers so that they can sustain this idea of making sure that Hindu and Muslim children were working together, they were respectful of each other. And that's why the focus is also on getting educators on board, and educators both in private institutions and public institutions. Obviously, educators in public institutions have very little opportunity to actually capitalize on this. They are paid less, they are overworked all the time. So that's why this becomes less sustainable. But we also believe that having educators from across the board, take this project up and replicate at least some aspects of this project is going to be helpful. So we're trying to, bridge the privileged and less privileged backgrounds by getting educators work as opinion leaders and anchors who will do the work, the difficult task of sustaining the projects. As far as the second question of making your kids too sensitive and kind is concerned, I thoroughly believe that parents and educators need to be very careful about the kind of situations children will find themselves in, because, for instance, a family dinner and a family conversation, and the child questions the authority, and this authority comes from an extended family network, and that could create a very difficult situation. So the idea with critical thinking skills is also to ensure that children learn to frame their questions, to frame their opinions in ways that are respectful of the differences. That is one way of ensuring that they do not harm themselves in the process of creating some form of change. I do not believe that we should use children to disrupt societies. That is problematic. And that's why the focus is on parents and educators. Children should not be burdened with that responsibility. But our responsibility is also to ensure that children have the environment, the safe environment where they can practice their politics in a respectful fashion. And I think exposure to different communities will ensure that your kids develop a practical acumen to a large extent, and do not end up being too sensitive. That happens when they are extremely cocooned and they do not have the opportunity to have conversations, initiate dialogues on their own, and try to mitigate conflict situations. So creating safe environments, creating simulated environments where they can mitigate conflict situations before actually putting them in a situation like that is extremely crucial. And I think it's the responsibility of the parents and the educators to a large extent.
Yeah, somehow I find that in all of these conversations, it all comes back to education, right? So whether it is education in schools or education at home or whatever it is, it's always about making possible contexts where transformation can happen, which is probably what is the core of education, right? So yeah, I mean, I think, like you said, Kiran, it's important that we don't place the burden of transformation on children, but create contexts where such transformation becomes possible. Are there any other questions from the audience?
Just add to that, why we keep putting so much emphasis on self-care, pragmatism, like reading the room, as you say, emotional intelligence, because you have to take care of yourself and ensure your own safety. And we never say that, like you blindly rush into a situation because you are the savior of the world. So we have to, as you said earlier, balance, I think, is the word here.
Yeah, but I also think one word, that was not used, but I think it was implied in many sentences, was humility, right? So also not to set ourselves up as saviors, whether one is an educator or playing any other role, to let the saving happen from the people themselves, whoever's involved.
I think parents also have to ask themselves that, are we really doing this for our concern for the child, or there is also our own reputation, prestige, our own status in the community is at stake. So we worried more about ourselves, or are we worried more about our children's future? I think that's a delicate question and difficult question that also we need to ask.
No, it was not about ourselves. It was more about what happens to the generation after that. Because my observation is the generation after that has no limitations. So their thought processes are so different. And I somehow feel that they get lost sometimes.
This is a long discussion, right? But I think, the questions of why and why not are not necessarily single questions. So every time you ask a why, it's going to lead to something that, begs further whys. And I think we often are uncomfortable with that unending process of self-examination, really. But maybe that's the basic lesson, right? That we have to get comfortable with discomfort and then decide what to do with it. So maybe we should let our speakers go. But thank you both for,